Yes, guys, how are we? Welcome to the first episode of Dilated Peoples of the Caribbean. It may be just a little bit like my last video series that I did, which was called Bastions of Cultural Freedom, which I hope went down well. But this time I'll be focusing on the Caribbean, going back 500 years minimum, what the story was, how the people come to be people of the dilated peoples of the Caribbean, you know. Obviously, there's a saying in Jamaica, out of many comes one. There's a reason for that. It's because they're quite diverse as a population. Obviously, I've trimmed it down to like four main populations that sort of have frequented those islands in the last few hundred years that I'm going to focus on. You got the first who got there were the indigenous tribes, that were there to begin with. Then obviously you had the Europeans arrive around the 1500s. At that point, obviously, the transatlantic slave movement kicked into gear, and this is where a black African population, who is still the mainstay population, came into the fray. They started populating the Caribbean to what we see it as to today. And then obviously 100 or 150 years or so later, with the abolition of slavery, they needed replacements, and those replacements were, first of all, a few thousand Chinese, and then obviously it really kicked into gear with Indians going to places like Trinidad, Guyana, Grenada and Jamaica. Obviously they've all got harrowing stories, especially from, say, I would say, be honest, the darker skinned majority. But obviously history is history. It's still a great history to have, people have been running around the world, having conflicts with each other and taking over lands all the time, so it does happen. And it's to be sort of celebrated and something to be proud of as well, in many respects, going around the world, putting your culture onto everyone. You could say, if someone else done it, they'd be proud of it, right? So that's to be recognised too. Obviously, a little bit of about the Irish struggle as well. So, because obviously they were via the Cromwellian conquests with Ireland in the 1600s, where the British went over there to try and make them become a part of Britain, or deal with Ireland's unruly, as I've put it in text. They were obviously taken away from their homes and sent to the Caribbean, most notably Barbados, one of the island of my background. And they were there for like a good few years. They managed to get away, but they were dealt with quite harshly at that period in time by the British, or the English, you might want to say. So we've got to go into that as well. Obviously, like the African story, we look at it from the West African perspective, in the sense that, we go into as to how they came to be wanting to sell their subjects or release their subjects for slavery. Same pattern again with the indentured servitude system. You had the Chinese and the Indians having like these middlemen, or these agents, or these they'd have different names, from crimps or Akatis or whatever, and they would go and sift population from within their populations and make sure that they're on boats to go out to places that they don't even know, on contracts that aren't even worth the paper that they're written on, and they were tantamount to slaves at the time. So you've got to mention that kind of thing as well, and just bring it up to near enough like the contemporary, or what we know to this day, So that's what's gonna be lined up and be spoken about. Obviously, as well as that, we've tried to include, when they first got there, it was mainly the British, the French and the Spanish who were the superpower at the time, especially the Spanish, right? And also the Dutch to a lesser extent, that got kind of forced out and bought out, and through conflict didn't have as much of a influence on the Caribbean as I would say the British and the French and the Spanish. And obviously they're close in proximity, but can you imagine, like, because of all the conflict, you've got people of the same diaspora speaking different languages that are around the corner from each other, literally. Can you imagine, like, you live in London? Well, you can right now, but can you imagine, like, in London there's one language, and then, you know, literally, like, in Birmingham there's another language, and in Scotland there's another language, but they're all the same diaspora and all in close proximity. And I like to say this, they were speaking the same language 300 years ago, but they're speaking different languages. So I tried to, as much as I could, include a little bit of the French Caribbean, as well as, like, tales of the Spanish Caribbean, which is what is going to be told in the first or second video, because they've got their heroes too that freed them from chains. It's just not the Jamaican story, you know, it's the whole Caribbean that we try to cover, although you can never really say enough, you know. And yeah, man, I hope it's received well. I'll try and get through it as quick as I can. I won't mess around with it. Yeah, and yeah, I hope it just really goes down quite well, you know. So anyway, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to read off the introduction section to you, and just cover that for this video, and then yeah, go from there. All right, so let's go. Unless it was a Viking shipwreck or over a millennium ago, or myth of a West African arrival thousands of years ago, the general consensus was and still is that mankind left Africa, walked through the Asian plain and settled the Eurasian landmass for a few thousand years prior to cataclysmic ice age, forging in the physical form a new land bridge that made its frozen creation the open gateway for the human race to flood into the Americas through the northwest flank. Warm-blooded and attracted to curiosity, Homo sapiens spread south into modern-day unnaturally named USA, etching toward the Tropic of Cancer, foraging and eventually filtering through the bottleneck that separates north from south. These first arrivals, void of pre-record, were the first peoples to stake their claim of settling the Central American region as a branch of expansion for our species. At the juncture of the 15th century, European existence had its first glance of what they would have become if they had never encountered the dilution of social constructs, such as cultural exchange, survivalism of inhospitable environments, civil society competition, and the disease of conflict, which were the cement blocks of technological advancement relied upon as the forceps that spread the two parties apart from Ice Age captivity. Transversely, the indigenous from the naturist perspective would surely have mustered the bodily influenza feeling that the modern-day metrosexual would encounter with the soon-to-be enrolled artificial intelligence beings in colonization of our own image as soon as science uncuffs ethical morality and plants mechanically made wombs that reproduce the latest hybrids that will be seen as close to gods, paving the way for the mixed machine-race cyborg generation. As a prequel, Europeans must be recognized, acknowledged, and educationally respected for historical written recollection. Yes, it could be argued that if inhabitants were there first, then how can one claim discovery? Negative. The Eastern Hemisphere, at this point, on the more populous side of Earth, must concede studiously that the first official recorded contact with the known world was in 1492. When Christopher Columbus came ashore, celebrated in blissful romance. The moral of the story is that a track and field athlete, without doubt, would set numerous records whilst training and exceed boundaries that would set the televised fan in amazement. Nevertheless, heroics can never be accepted as it leaps beneath the kingdom of official record. Right, so often in like many other quarters, like you could say, like people would often say, how can somebody discover something if people are already there, or it was already existing thousands of years before they discovered it? Okay, fair enough. That's absolutely true. No one's not denying that, right? But in the same time, yeah, like if you don't keep written record and it's just by legend or by myth and it's not recorded in the proper way as we do now with things, yeah, right. How can you deny somebody discovering something, and all you can say is that they discovered it to the contemporary world that we live in right now, and that's to be respected. The Eastern Hemisphere, yes, you can say, like, if there's if people have had boats going back thousands of years, yeah, a Viking ship could have ended up in North America, an African boat could have ended up in South America, yeah, most probably, but it wasn't recorded in detail, and it might be in myth or in legend and possibly true, but documented, recorded, flag in the ground, celebrated in romance, man, and you should give them that, because they made the Eastern Hemisphere aware of the Western Hemisphere, and that is something to behold, to go into the unknown and take that risk. As it gets warmer and warmer, you're getting closer to the equator, you must think the sea's going to boil, you're going to, all types of mental health, do you know what I mean? And they still carried on. So it's to be respected and to be acknowledged, that, do you know what I mean? That happened in 1492, and it's celebrated in romance once again, And at the end of the day, man, I'm going to say this many times over, but like, yeah, man, history's history, innit? And it sets a foundation for the world to what everyone's lived to right now. So it's not like you're upsetting the apple cart, like denying like something like religion or anything like that, because people believe what they believe here. But this here, it's documented, and yeah, it's to be like respected, man. Just the feat itself, to do that and be the first to do that. So yeah, I know I respect it, and I just wanted to set the tone and get that out there. So that was the sort of intro section. Yep, so we know the story, the human story, whatever, and obviously, the first indigenous Americans would have come through via Asia, the Asian land bridge, Ice Age, and then down into the Americas, and this eventually they've ended up in the Caribbean, and yeah, that's it really. Next episode, we're going to discuss, go into a couple of the indigenous tribes of the Caribbean. We're going to look into the Taino, I believe. They've got a story to tell. They're the first people that sort of met the Europeans or hosted the Europeans, and their story starts way before then, but in contact or encounters with the Europeans, it's around about the 1500 mark in terms of year, and yeah, we'll cover that, next. Anyway, once again, I hope this message reaches you well, and deliver this message straight to your heart because it's from mine. All right, love, one, bless.